Right now, it's true. It's tough being a Tory.
Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, says the Blue team have got the blues. What is actually going on at this really quite quiet Conservative Party conference in Manchester? We will reveal all in this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester.
And Chris, also in Manchester, on a stool. I feel sort of like some sort
like
of
a Westlife reunion.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We just need a couple of additional. Was it 4 or 5 in Westlife?
It varied.
Oh, did it? Okay. We need a couple more band members and be able to sing, and then that's exactly what it would be.
And we're in quite an echoey foyer at the end of the day at conference, so there's probably going to be a lot of clattering and trolleys and things being rolled past. So if it is a lively audio experience, that is why.
It's a cappella political analysis.
Yes, and talking of music, Lady Gaga's in Manchester tonight.
Yes.
So all the big names are here.
This is quite
Mel Stride, Lady Gaga. Right, there's a few things to catch up on though, because we didn't talk about this conference on yesterday's episode, even though it started at the weekend. First of all, the atmosphere. You were saying, Chris, last week that, this would be different from last year's Conservative Party conference because they had the sort of sugar rush of choosing a new leader, which kind of brought more attention and more discussion. How has it turned out?
So I think there's two things, and these things I don't think are in contradiction. So the numbers are down. There's no doubt about that.
You can just tell.
You can just tell. The numbers are down. Now, to an extent, they're always going to be. Year 2 in a parliament, as far as conference season is concerned, we were talking about this last week, is kind of the lowest of the low, because the next general election is a million miles away. They're not going through a leadership race or the immediate post-election kind of thing. If you're a kind of corporate lobbyist or whatever, well, you'd want to talk to the Conservatives, but they're not really a priority now, to be honest. But yeah, the numbers are definitely down. But there is quite a lot of energy, actually.
Oh, yeah.
And I think my theory about this, and I've run this past various senior Conservatives I've talked to, there's a sort of Darwinian thing going on, in that if you've decided to turn up, you've got energy. You want to be involved in the ideas that this party are kicking around. You want to be part of its future. And if you don't, then you've not come, or you've switched to Reform, or whatever. So I think there is energy, and particularly actually in the fringe events. You've seen some fringe events, smaller venues for the fringe events, but where it's standing room only or there's a queue. And then in the main hall, for some speakers, not all, it is a bit on the thin side.
And in terms of big announcements so far, on Sunday, Kemi Badenoch, the leader, said that, confirmed what kind of everyone suspected. She would campaign to leave the European Convention on Human Rights, arguing it would make it easier to deport people that they wanted to remove from the country. And Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, doing his speech on Monday morning. Maybe not the best timing. Because
10 a.m. 10 a.m. was early.
Yeah, because there was quite a lot of empty seats there. But not an empty speech, some quite big ideas.
Completely. There's been a splash of journalese here. There's been a blitz of policy announcements, because there has, and the Conservatives and Kemi Badenoch have been criticised for not having enough policy. I mean, there's loads of it floating around this week. So the Mel Stride thing, the big picture argument was there is clear blue water or whatever coloured water between the Conservatives, Labour and Reform on the economy. They say that they are making a economically credible pitch to try and someone very dutifully, just out of our shot here, not wanting to walk behind us, solved that dilemma by walking backwards.
Great. Thanks. Whoever you are, thank you.
Which I caught in my eye line, and I just couldn't keep a straight face. Anyway,
no turning back.
Thank you to the member of the Greater Manchester Ambulance Service, who is very good at walking backwards. Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, making an argument about, as they see it, economic credibility, the country not living within its means, arguing for significant cuts around welfare and around the size of the civil service, and then spending some of the money saved on an idea to try and make it easier for people to buy a house. So the first £5,000 of people's national insurance contributions going into a pot that are then passed to you
when they start their first job.
When they start their first job.
So not everyone.
Indeed. When they start their first job, which you can then go towards a home, or indeed towards anything else if you didn't want to buy a home. And then there was an idea in England to get rid of business rates for smaller businesses to try and keep high streets going. The challenge that the party has, and they'll double down on this economic credibility argument when Kemi Badenoch speaks on Wednesday, is I think you can argue it is distinctive territory from Labour and Reform. I think you can argue there's a sort of intellectual consistency to it. The issue they've got is that their opponents are just going to shout Liz and Truss at them over and over again. You know, I think we said
Or
this
Rishi and Sunak, or Boris and Johnson,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
they also increase public spending.
And then on the migration point, they can certainly make that point about the quote unquote Boris wave towards Boris Johnson. And I still hear privately an argument that is happening about, does the party need to do, and I've asked Kemi Badenoch about this in the past, but does it need to take a leaf out of Keir Starmer's book, not something that they would frequently be comfortable with, and have a public row with Liz Truss in which she is told she's never welcome back in the party or whatever, to try and draw a line between what happened then and now. Because I think in the same way that Conservatives talk about Gordon Brown and selling the gold, or the 10p that was added to the state pension, or the note that Liam Byrne left in 2010 saying there's no money left, or Labour like to talk about Black Wednesday in 1992. The Conservatives' opponents will talk about Liz Truss for the next quarter of a century. So at what point does the party have a really public reckoning with it, to try and hope that people say, OK, it's changed, you know? And that, privately, that conversation I still hear. But that economic argument is going to be central, I think, to what we hear from the Conservatives in the next few months.
Which then brings us to today, Tuesday, where the main act on the stage was Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary. But kind of the news started rolling about him in advance, because The Guardian had a recording from an event he was at a few months ago, where he was talking about the time he'd spent in one of the suburbs of Birmingham called Handsworth, where he was making a documentary about litter and the state of the streets. And he'd said in this recording that Handsworth was just a really messy place. It was very untidy. He then said that in 90 minutes he didn't see a single white person in the street, and he said that that was, in his view, a failure of integration.
Yeah,
and that caused some fireworks.
It did. He also said in that same leaked extract that The Guardian published that it didn't matter what the colour of someone's skin was or their religion, but the point he was trying to make was one about integration. Now, it did cause fireworks because you had Richard Parker, the Labour Mayor of the West Midlands, suggesting that it was racist because it was pointing to skin colour, something Mr Jenrick very strongly dismisses. You've had Anna Turley, the chair of the Labour Party, also making some pretty disparaging comments. I caught up with Robert Jenrick this morning about all of this, and he said, look, a lack of integration can lead a country into a very dark place, and argued that what had happened in this city just a couple of days ago outside the synagogue was an illustration of where a lack of integration can go. So we've seen a conversation here today about integration and what the state and what society should try and do about that. Mr Jenrick, we should be clear, is not disputing the recording and not seeking to resile from what he said. In fact, trying to make an argument that said he was prescient in what he said then. And Kemi Badenoch has also said, that these questions around integration are entirely reasonable.
Although you'll be able to hear what James Cleverly, the Shadow Housing Secretary, said about it when I spoke to him earlier, which we'll play in a second. But in terms of Robert Jenrick's speech, kind of the big policy he came up with was this idea of a bit more scrutiny on judges, and in particular the judges who are in the immigration tribunals, who hear people's cases against deportation or their asylum being rejected. And he said he'd done a bit of digging into their political interests.
Yeah, indeed. And they've spent quite a long time looking at all of this, because I think they were very conscious they needed to be diligent and get it cleared by their own lawyers and all of that. And they are making an argument that says that, they have sought the evidence to try and substantiate their claim that in some instances, as they would see it, there are activist judges. Where I think it gets interesting politically, and this extends on into the wider announcement that Mr Jenrick was making about the Sentencing Council in England and Wales, is the sort of separation of powers. What legitimate role do politicians have in the whole business of judges and the judiciary? And there's been some political blowback around that as well. But when you have a very live political argument about what critics describe as two-tier justice, it becomes political.
And well done for remembering the full name of the Mayor of the West Midlands. because I remembered the Richard part. I forgot the Parker part while I was talking to James Cleverly on this very spot just after Robert Jenrick had done his speech. So you'll hear this conversation that I had with James Cleverly. And bear in mind, one of the examples that Robert Jenrick gave in his speech about why the UK would need to leave the European Convention on Human Rights was this case that's been widely reported that involves somebody being deported to Albania and whether they could go or not based on what kind of chicken nuggets their child liked, which was reported in one way, which doesn't necessarily truly reflect what actually happened in that case. Anyway, here is my conversation with James Cleverly, Shadow Housing Secretary from a little while ago. James Cleverly, welcome back.
Thank you. It's been a while.
Well, I was just wondering how many different jobs we've interviewed you in. I don't think we saw you when you were Home Secretary. I don't think you were on Newscast as Home Secretary.
No, I don't think it was. You definitely did it when I was chairman. You definitely did it when I was at the Foreign Office. I don't think you did it during my 9 glorious weeks as Secretary of State for Education.
No. Much as we would have liked it. It was an interesting time.
It was during the summer holidays.
Yeah, a great time. Yeah. At least the teachers won't be hassling you too much then if they're on holiday. Is it true you're wearing pink braces under that suit?
I am.
There we go.
There you go. Breast Cancer Awareness Month.
Oh, so it's actually for a good cause. It's not just to be cool.
I've got a veritable rainbow of brightly coloured braces, but I'm wearing the pink ones because breast cancer and obviously with Susie and everything.
Yeah, of course. And great that she's doing so well.
Yeah, she's doing really well. She's doing really, really well.
Right, I've got to say, I just got here about an hour ago. This is the quietest Conservative Party conference I've ever been to. And I know you'll say, oh, the fringes are packed, it's full of ideas. It definitely is much quieter, isn't it?
There are definitely fewer people here than in previous years. And I think this is the first year where we're really confronted with the reality that we are in opposition. Last year's conference, we had the I was about to say artificial buzz. That's not true.
No, the buzz was real.
It was a very real buzz because of the leadership competition. So lots of people, lots of buzz, lots of energy. This is the first year where the reality of being in opposition has fully hit home. That said, I think the average age of the delegates has probably dropped by about 20 years.
Okay.
And the fringe events are genuinely very, very busy. And there are lots of ideas kicking around, but there are far fewer people than before.
Can you put
you can get a drink now, which is good.
I was going to say, can you put a brave face on it, or is it actually just bad?
Look, it's not what we want to be. We like being in government. We like the challenge of being in government. We like having lots and lots of people here. There are a few advantages. It's a little bit quicker getting through security, and you can actually get a drink in the bar, which is nice.
Robert Jenrick just did his speech in the main, I was going to say the main stadium, the main auditorium. It's definitely not a stadium. And he made this joke at the start about it's tough being a Tory right now. And he was kind of joking, and he then went to talk on about Tories being on reality shows and not doing very well. But do you think he had a wider point about it is quite tough being in your party right now?
Yeah, it is tough. And we don't, I know this can sound a bit JFK about this, but we don't do it because it's easy. But we do it because it's important. And you know what? If you want the short-term adrenaline hit of being superficially popular, then some of my former friends and colleagues have gone off to reform because at the moment,
including 20 councillors today.
Yeah, but look, and they won't be the last. They won't be the last. But the bottom line is that reform are not the answer, and the reason they're not the answer is because it's all about that adrenaline hit. It's all about trying to get the clicks and likes, which is great in the short term, but ultimately that is not how you credibly can run a council or a county or a country, and that is the differentiation between us and them. They are razzmatazz and really good at it.
Okay, how come that's an adrenaline kick from reform, but Kemi Badenoch saying she would deport 150,000 illegal migrants every year without a real plan for doing it and no guarantee she ever could? How's that not just the same?
Oh no, that is the big difference. That is the big difference because actually,
it's based on some imaginary returns agreements with other countries.
But it's also underpinned by our commitment about the ECHR, and this is the big difference between us and reform, for example. So basically, Farage says, we leave the ECHR and all our immigration problems go away. And I'm on record of being very, very sceptical. And I said leaving the ECHR is not a silver bullet, and it's that kind of blasé. We do this one thing and all our dreams come true. That's the reform nonsense. What we've done, and Kemi got some stick for doing it this way round, is we spent the best part of the year doing the proper thinking about that, and that 180-page legal opinion from Lord Wolfson about what the implications of leaving the ECHR is, what else we would have to do, how long it would take. Not easy, but important, which means that when we're talking about it, we're talking about it with credibility rather than reform, which is just a headline.
Yeah, and I see the whole package you're referring to there, but that 150,000 target, I mean, it is a sort of made-up number, isn't it?
Well, if you're going to... So, if you take...
Now we're going to have an existential argument about what a target is.
But the point is, whenever political parties or governments say, this is the target number, so we've just had my opposite number, or I suppose I'm his opposite number, but anyway, I like to think of him as my opposite number, Steve Reed, saying, we're going to build 1.5 million houses across the lifetime of the Parliament. And you turn around and say, that's just a made-up number. It's a target. It's a target. The difference between his target and our target is we've shown our workings out. We've shown how we are going to do that. And the Labour government and Reform, two sides of the same coin, plucking numbers out the air, saying their targets, and then not having anything to back it up.
I think what I'm trying to get at is that your target for returns or deportations relies on lots of other countries cooperating. So it's not really in your hands. It's not in your gift.
But this is true with economic targets. Economic targets rely on businesses doing stuff. Trade targets rely on other countries doing stuff. The bottom line is every single element of government activity relies on people, on businesses, on other countries. So saying, but that relies on other countries doing stuff, I don't think it's a fair criticism. And the difference is we are showing in detail how we're going to set about cutting public spending so we can reduce the deficit ultimately, so we can ease the tax burden, how we're going to go about securing our borders through the ECHR, how we're going to underpin economic growth. Look, sometimes it's a bit boring, but it's really important.
But it's not boring to me, not boring here. On the ECHR...
Well, you newscast guys love a bit of detail.
We love all that stuff, yeah, and that's why we're tuned in for years to all this stuff. On the ECHR, though, what's kind of been your journey on it? Were you okay with us being members of it at first, and you've been convinced that now we need to withdraw, or what's the?
So I have always been conscious, and when I was Home Secretary, very conscious of how the interpretation of the ECHR, which is a million miles away from the founding fathers. I think expectations and aspirations has made it really, really difficult to maintain public trust in our immigration system, our legal system, our deportation system. When you've got, sadly, stories like this come about far, far, far too often, when you have violent criminals from overseas who are from countries that have stable governments and a strong rule of law, and we are not being allowed to deport them because of a really, really, let's be generous and say creative interpretation of a right to a family life. The British people look at us in government and go, come on, who's actually in charge of this country? That is a problem, and that is a problem that has to be dealt with.
So when was the moment for you when you're like, we're going to have to leave this thing?
Well, for me, I'll be honest with you, for me, it was meetings that I had with Lord Wolfson whilst he was going through this process. And
so it was this year?
Well, so my long-standing position, and I've said this publicly, and I've said this regularly, I didn't believe that leaving the ECHR on its own was a silver bullet. And I've said that. People have played that back to me and said, you're a passionate defender of the ECHR. And I'm like, no, what I said was leaving it is not a silver bullet. Lord Wolfson's report basically says leaving it is not a silver bullet. Yeah. It's more complicated than that, and there's other things we'd also happen to do.
I get you. When you're talking about the public trusting the system and the ECHR and judges playing into that, are some of your colleagues making that worse, though? And I just think constantly citing that example of the Albanian guy who couldn't be sent back to Albania because his son didn't like the chicken nuggets in Albania, which is actually not true. And it was repeated again today in this building in front of the TV camera. It's not true.
That's not an example. That's not the example I've used. And also,
Robert Jenrick used it.
Well, I wouldn't. I'm not suggesting that that is the best example. You tell him to not use it
in the future.
Well, I'll double check. I'll double check. So he's saying it. You're saying it's not true. I'll double check on the detail.
Because it's just not true.
Okay, but
I'm right.
Yeah, I am. Yeah. But the point is, look, we've actually got a pretty good returns agreement with Albania, which, to be fair, Rob was instrumental in negotiating. He and I worked quite closely when he was at the Home Office and I was at the Foreign Office to get that returns agreement with the Albanians, and it's been highly effective, cutting illegal Albanian migration by 90%, 90%. So I'm very pleased with that. But there are plenty. We've had problems with deporting Pakistani criminals, Indian criminals, Jamaican criminals. Jamaica is a Commonwealth country with a British system of government, a high-functioning judicial system, and we've had real trouble deporting very violent criminals back to Jamaica because of the ECHR. And the bottom line is, and I gave speeches about this when I was Home Secretary and speeches about this when I was Foreign Secretary, if we don't make these international agreements and institutions relevant for the modern age, they will die. And the bottom line is, despite years of trying to make reform happen with the ECHR, it's not happened.
That bell is Matt Chorley from 5 Live because he's doing his show just there. So it's not like a bus has arrived or anything like that.
I thought the boxing match has started.
Anytime someone gives an incorrect anecdote about the ECHR, a bell rings somewhere. If Robert Jenrick was here, it'd be dinging away. Something else Robert Jenrick said, and this is coming up, is that leaked recording in The Guardian today from a few months ago where he was talking about one of the suburbs of Birmingham where he said he didn't see any white faces, just showed that it just doesn't, there's no integration there. I mean, what's your take on those comments? And I'm sure you've been asked about it a lot today already.
Yeah, well, so funny enough, my speech yesterday, I was saying how important it is that we do integrate communities. I think there's been this left-wing subscription to the idea of multiculturalism. In practice, I think what that has turned into is parallel culturalism, and different communities, different ethnicities, different religions believing that they are not all held by the same level of accountability or the same laws or the same rules. I regard that as deeply, deeply, deeply damaging. The dispassionate and universal application of the laws of this country, that is how you have healthy, integrated, successful communities. And I think that this differentiated approach, because of this obsession with the idea of multiculturalism, I think has been really counterproductive.
But is it okay for him to do it on the base, talking about a neighbourhood on the basis of people's skin colour?
Well, look, I've not heard the full recording. I know Rob really well, he will choose his words and I will choose mine. But I'm also not going to condemn someone without listening to the full context of the quote, because my understanding, and as I say, I've not actually heard the recording because I've been bouncing backwards and forwards between fringe events and stuff. But my understanding is he then went on to say how important it is to integrate communities. He wasn't saying that black faces are inherently bad. Well, I think my understanding is what you're saying is that where you fail to have integration, that is not a good thing.
But when then Andy Street, the former mayor of the West Midlands, says Robert Jenrick is wrong, that area is very integrated, I mean, who do you think's right?
Well, Andy knows his city better than anyone.
Better than Robert Jenrick.
He was the mayor. He lived there, worked there, had a career there, was the civic leader there, and so Andy knows his patch better than anybody else, better than the current famous mayor of Birmingham, who is
Richard something or other.
Bingo, exactly. Oops. Not even a household name in his own household. I mean, this is.
Sorry.
Well, look, that's not your fault.
Gotcha.
That's not your fault. That's his fault. That's his fault, because he is half the man that Andy Street was as mayor of Birmingham and the West Mids. But look, Andy Street knows his area, and. But integration matters. It is a thing, and the really look. Could Rob have chosen his words more carefully? I don't know, quite possibly. But the point he was making, and this is something we now have to have the courage to say, is segregated communities, even self-segregating communities, that's not the British tradition. Other countries do that and they are poorer for it. We have traditionally been good at this. It's not an instant fix, but this has been one of our strong suits, and we should be really careful about letting that go.
So Robert Jenrick could have chosen his words more carefully?
Look,
That's what you just said, yeah.
potentially. But as I say,
Okay.
I've not heard the full quote, and I'm not going to condemn him without knowing the full quote.
And Richard Parker is the mayor of the West Midlands. Apologies, Richard, for forgetting your surname briefly.
And I can
if
confirm,
you're watching and listening.
I can confirm. Was that through the earpiece, or did you remember that?
I don't reveal my sources. Right, let's talk about your brief, the housing brief. How would the Tories build more houses?
So we've got to ease we've got to ease some of the regulatory burden. We've got to make it easier for people to say yes. One of the things that we're looking
So looser planning laws.
Well, it's not what we've got isn't working. And one of the things that we've got to recognise, if we want something to be different, you have to change something. So there's no point in just wanting it harder. That's what Steve Reed's doing on the Labour benches. If
Well, no, they are changing the planning system.
Actually, I'm being a bit unfair.
And also, all those changes haven't bedded in yet.
They've made some steps in the right direction. I don't think they've gone far enough or fast enough. And I know what you're going to say is a lot of that regulatory burden was on our watch, and that is true. And one of the things about being kicked out of government is it does then force you to think about the things you did whilst you were in government. But we've got to find ways of making it easier for communities to say yes. So, for example, when housing developments are proposed and local communities think, well, hang on, none of my kids are going to be able to afford these houses. I'm not going to be able to see my kids or my grandchildren because these are going to be bought up by people who made all their money in London and are retiring to, let's say, North Essex in my patch. Unsurprisingly, the existing residents say no, 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 no. I want to find ways of making them want to say yes. And some of that is around scale and pace and build quality. Some of that is about giving them and their families a credible chance of affording those homes so they're not priced out of the new homes in their own area. Some of that is about sensibly easing the regulatory burden. And like each individual straw seems like a terribly good idea, but too many of them, and it breaks the camel's back. And I do think, and the other thing, we'll get a grip of London. City of 10 million people, this year, 5,000 new stock, 5,000 completions.
Yeah.
In a city of 10 million people. That is just unacceptable.
Talking of London, do you fancy having a run for being mayor? We've been talking about mayors already in this conversation.
Look, the mayor of big cities like London is an incredibly important job. We've already discussed the huge difference that Andy Street made to Birmingham and the West Midlands. Look, I love being the mayor for Braintree. I know I've had so many people say, "Oh, you cut your teeth in London politics." It's a really, really important job. My heart is in Essex, but I also know it is. Watching London go wrong angers me enormously. But as I say, I'm not.
It sounds like you're thinking about it, though.
Look, I'd be stupid not to think about it, but as I say, my heart's in Essex.
Yeah. I suppose, what's the time frame then? When would you have to make a decision? What's the selection process in the Conservative Party?
I genuinely don't know. So the election is what, 2028? 2028.
So you'd have to get a move on quite soon, wouldn't you? I just don't know what the selection timetable is.
Are you angling to be a campaign manager for
No, absolutely no way. No, I'm just trying to peer into your mind.
Mate, well...
Okay, well, you're not ruling it out, though, are you? do that. I mean, I'm just thinking of Matt Chorley sitting over there, classic Matt Chorley political journalist way of looking at it.
I mean, one of the things, like ruling things in, ruling things out, in politics they're fairly meaningless. I lose track of the lists of things that Keir Starmer ruled in or ruled out before instantly ditching them as soon as he became. I mean, the bottom line is political commitments are not the most stable currency in the exchange mechanism.
Okay, we'll see what you end up doing. James, thank you very much.
Cheers a lot, mate. Thank you.
So that was James Cleverly, the Shadow Housing Secretary. I nearly forgot his job there because he's had a lot of jobs.
He has had a lot of jobs.
It's been a long day. I've done a whole 27 minutes of work. Let's go backwards. Not ruling out running for London Mayor.
Wasn't that a fantastic exchange? And to be fair to James Cleverly, he didn't try and duck and... Well, he did a bit of weaving.
I mean, he was very James Cleverly.
Yeah. He exactly.
He did his agonising on air.
Yeah, he did. And, I often say to folks, it is public life. These are people who are putting themselves in, choosing to put themselves in front of newscasters and the rest of the country, and then have to be subject, therefore, to public discussions about their potential career options, which most of us don't have to discuss in public. You know, he used to be in the London Assembly. There's a logic, therefore, to your question, and clearly he's weighing it up.
Yeah, he was a protege of Boris Johnson.
Indeed.
Then going backwards through the interview, there is now a bit of a divide opening up within the Conservative Party about the response to Robert Jenrick, in that on one side you've got Robert Jenrick himself and Kemi Badenoch standing by the language and the way he said what he said, and then on the other side you've got James Cleverly. Also, I noticed Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, saying similar things, that they would not have talked about that issue in that way.
Yeah, and so it comes down to sort of choice of language, doesn't it? Punchiness around language. Some are worried to be seen as a sort of language police, but then actually we've seen in some of the remarks some of his colleagues not comfortable with that kind of formulation, because a lot of the centrality of his argument wouldn't be disputed by many folk here, I don't think, but wouldn't be disputed perhaps by the whole idea of needing to work around integration issues, I think would be pretty widely sort of shared. But yeah, Robert Jenrick has decided for a while now, hasn't he, that he wants to be kind of punchy. He wants to communicate in a pretty unflinching, unvarnished way. And I suppose that's going to come with moments where even your own colleagues perhaps think, could you have phrased it a little differently?
Now, talking of words, somebody who will be rehearsing their words is Kemi Badenoch ahead of her big conference speech on Wednesday morning.
Yes, and in fact, just as I was dashing here, I spotted but hadn't yet watched a social media video I think they've done, which is the classic in all the parties will do something like this, where the person's sort of, not quite hunched over the desk, with a glass of something strong or whatever, or surrounded by litter. So it's something neatly choreographed, but gives the impression of, because it's real, that they're going through the last process of, do we change this, do we change that? And, even when stuff's been written potentially some distance in advance and has gone through all the drafts, I know that the leaders are always aware, all the stage speakers are, what's happening in this part of the world or that part of the world, what might need a last minute rewrite, does that joke work in that paragraph, because have we not changed the thing immediately after it, all that kind of stuff. And it's worth remembering, it's Kemi Badenoch's first conference speech as leader, because she was elected just after the party conference last year, and I don't think there's been a harder time in modern history to lead the Conservative Party. Massive election defeat, then going backwards. They're in the teens in the opinion polls. Kemi Badenoch, I think, is probably the least well-known of the big Westminster Party leaders, partly, in fact, primarily because she's just been around in the leadership job for a lot less time than Keir Starmer, who's been Prime Minister, so that gives you massive prominence. Nigel Farage, who's been around in a very prominent place for ages and ages and ages. And Ed Davey, who was a party leader during an election campaign in which he made himself very prominent courtesy of all those stunts. So, in the attention economy of politics, she's had a bit of a recession, really, whilst it's been boom time for Nigel Farage, and indeed for various reasons, to a degree at least, for the others. And actually, Keir Starmer's prominent, Prime Minister's always prominent, but his prominence has arguably been elevated because of some of the foul-ups that they've had in government. So being noticed, shaping the argument, convincing this party, both her MPs and then the wider party, that she is the person to carry on leading the party, I think remains a kind of task in hand, particularly with really tricky elections coming up next May for the party in England, Scotland and Wales, and a real sort of grimace that they fear that it could be another low point. They hope the ultimate low point, they're kind of bottoming out, but they expect them to be rough. And then I think we'll have a fleshing out of this economic and borders argument, European Convention on Human Rights, etc., dealing with small boats, and then building on where Mel Stride was, this kind of economic argument where they think they can make a distinctive case.
And interesting that there hasn't been much kind of leadership plotting happening at this conference, but then maybe that was never going to happen.
I think, there's chat. When does chat become plotting? That's probably in the eye of the journalist with a pen, to a degree. There can be sort of naked plotting, and there can be more subtle. There's chat, because, this is a party, and there's sometimes some gallows humour as well. This is a party that is not used to losing, and they're not used to losing and then going backwards. I think, think back to the last equivalent moment of this year for the Conservative Party was in 1998, when they were a year and a bit on from a colossal election defeat, having been in power for a decade plus time. And, as it turned out then, they were going to be out of power for a very long time and go down to another landslide defeat. But they were the main party of opposition in the opinion polls, and they had, their numbers were pretty limited as well in Parliament. But they were the main party of opposition, and at the moment, given the opinion polls, they are in numerical terms in the Commons, but often not in the national conversation. So it's really, really difficult for them.
Right, Chris, I will see you and Henry Zeffman tomorrow lunchtime for analysis of Kemi Badenoch's speech. Don't go home.
Turn up on time. I'll turn up on time.
And if you've been watching this episode of Newscast on YouTube, I hope you've enjoyed watching various Conservative Party members, activists, MPs, and shadow ministers walking behind us, as well as people pushing lots and lots of trolleys.
Yeah, exactly. And diligent ambulance staff walking backwards, for which I'm very grateful.
And if you've been listening, I hope you've enjoyed all those many, many sound effects that makes you realise we're definitely at a party conference. That's all for this episode of Newscast. We will be back, as promised, with another one very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.